2020 was a tumultuous year. The question we must all ask going forward is simple. What values, ethics, and behaviors from the old world are we going to preserve? And what new perspectives are we going to embrace as we build our future civilizations? This is the New World Podcast with Ariz Kaki and Akil Samji.
Welcome back to the New World Podcast. I'm your host, Ariz.
And I'm your host, Akil.
Today's guest on the Gen Z Spotlight is an ambitious and driven personality. He is an undergraduate student pursuing a Bachelor of Commerce degree at the Sauder School of Business at the University of British Columbia. He is the founder and CEO of For The Menstruator, the outreach director at Cardinals, a resident fellow at the Zeta Institute, and a co-host of a podcast he formerly hosted, the Second Impressions podcast, and a public speaker, having had the opportunity, to deliver a talk at TEDx this year. So with that said and done, please welcome Ziyaan. Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah. So before we begin, did we miss anything, or is there anything you'd like to tell our audience about yourself?
No, I think that was a pretty good introduction. But yeah, just to add on, I'm someone that's just passionate about social impact, passionate about giving back, and I've grown up with the values, being a smiley, just the values of giving back, and that's something that's so strong to me. And I'm super excited to talk about my journey and some of the things I've worked on before.
Sure. Before we get into the specifics or the specificities of the journey, something from my own personal. A question that I thought about the moment I first began to research about you and your ventures. I just wanted to know what it felt like from your anecdote, what it feels like to have seen the world so much at such a young age, because not from just your academic or your other ventures, but just in general, you were a native of Tanzania, you studied in Kenya for school, now you're undergraduate, you're attending in Canada. So what is that like? What are some of the positives and negatives, culture, food, anything?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've always sort of been grateful for, the fact that I've been able to explore and see the different parts of the world. I'm Indian by nationality. I have an Indian passport. And then I was born and raised in Tanzania, as you mentioned. I spent my last 4 years of high school in Kenya. And now I'm in Canada. So definitely I personally look at it as an advantage, because I'm able to look at the world through a pluralistic lens. I'm able to sort of relate to a lot of cultures, a lot of meet a lot of people, and just have this global perspective on life and things. And I think one thing I would say that's common between all the places that I've been to is just the fact that we're all human, and that's the essence of everything. So just having that perspective of how different people from around the world act, live, what they value, what they don't, being in one of the most, I would say, rural parts of Africa to being here in Canada, where there's people from all around the world. It's definitely allowed me to just, one, be grateful for the experiences that I've had, but also just look at the world as a place of as a mosaic, I would say, a mosaic of differences, but it's those differences that sort of allow us to be who we are, and that's human at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I know you're pursuing an undergrad degree at UBC, but I really wanted to ask, I know you have so many successful business ventures. What is the point of pursuing an undergrad in business? What are you looking to get out of it?
Well, I think, honestly, I personally think that at the end of the day, success is, and what I've worked on is sort of temporary. One day you could be the richest person on earth, and one day everything could just go away. But something that will always stay with you is your education, and that's what one of my mentors told me. That's what His Highness Yahya Khan also preaches, lifelong education. So you're never perfect. You're always learning. And that is why I wanted to pursue a Bachelor of Commerce, because I felt like a lot of the skills that I've learned over the last few years in the work that I've done has all been through experiential learning. I have no business knowledge. I don't know how, like, I didn't know anything, and I learned everything through sort of by doing it. But I've never really sat down in a class learning about how to make like a business plan or how to identify a target audience and things of that sort. And I think that is what the university experience is providing me, and that's something that will remain lifelong. And I also think that just coming to university teaches you more than just sitting in a class. There's so many harsh realities of life that I've learned moving to a whole different place, meeting so many different people, being more independent, and that whole university experience is something that one reason why I also decided to take this path instead of not pursuing school, and just focusing on the work that I'm doing.
You mentioned that you never had any experience before sitting in a classroom with regards to actually how to build a business model, or forget just even social entrepreneurship, like just basic actually being able to build these models. Judging by like your experience so far in the university system, do you see that we asked a lot of our Gen Z guests this, do you see that there's a disconnect between the academics versus the sort of real world experiential learning that you yourself forged for yourself? Because there's often this weird disconnect between this sort of pipeline that we have, right? The sort of real world pipeline back to the academia, and then academia producing the next generation of leaders based off feedback from the real world. And there's sort of this weird lagging loop. Do you see that you somehow have an edge at this moment? Because regardless of your impressive CV, the fact that you actually have the experience of building at this point something that's multinational, like at such a young age, do you see yourself kind of having a chip on your shoulder?
Yeah, I definitely feel like I do have an edge. I mean, even like just sitting in some of my classes, personally, I wouldn't call myself academically the best, but I've been in classes where there've been people that are academically really talented. But I feel like when it comes to being street smart and having conversations, networking, putting yourself out there, being a risk taker and things of that sort, those are some soft skills that I would say some students I sit in class with don't necessarily have. So definitely, I do agree that there is some sort of gap between the education system that we currently have versus some of the things you learn outside in the real world. But I feel like the education system is evolving, and they are trying. I feel like the way it's evolving is it's trying its best to be as practical as possible. And so like right now, I'm doing a class that's literally all about how to apply to jobs, how to like make your resume, how to network, how to take like an informational interview and things of that sort. And these are some of the things I already like knew before, but I see how much value it could provide to people that have never had that experience, right? And I think that's so practical. So definitely the education system is evolving. But I would say that starting at such an early age and doing the things that I've been privileged to do has definitely given me an edge in terms of in just the real world out there. Yeah.
But yeah, you're like an optimistic viewpoint, like the glass half full, right? That's the way you look at it. That makes sense. Yeah.
Now, you recently had a TED Talk, as we mentioned in the introduction. I'm not sure how recent it was, but judging by the release date. In there, I sort of written down a few notes that I kind of want to clarify with you. You spoke about the Japanese principle, Ikigai, in which you spoke of essentially, and you related that to your concept particularly, that you sort of put together essentially this model of building bridges, a blueprint or the so-called foundation of how you apply yourself to being an outreach to various established, I guess, institutions and structures, instead of building something from scratch. And I think that principle that you sort of highlighted was really, really astonishing to me, considering that now that I think about it, it's such a simple concept, yet at the same time, I've never been like really like sat down and kind of shown that before. And I think what you go to explain later on in the talk, and I'll obviously have you mention it as sort of explain the bridge analogy, but when you sort of explain things, you sort of explain things from the sense that the barrier to entry at this point for our generation is particularly lowered. And because it's so low, the ability for us just to hop over that barrier is much more easier, because we should look at things. There are some things that you can look at, some issues that you have to really look at like grassroots level, but there are some things that are already established that we sort of have this weird mindset now where we have to like tear the old things down. And it's like sometimes we kind of have to like look at the old things, see where they need improvement, and then make our part, make our legacy, as you talk about. So I want to give it the floor to you. Could you sort of describe this idea of Ikigai, and then this idea of building bridges between sort of existing institutions and then finding your own sort of bubble in between?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I love the fact that you actually understood the concept, because although it's very simple, I feel like some people didn't understand it at all. So I respect that you actually went into getting it. But to talk a little bit about the analogy, and looking back at my own experiences. So I'll go into detail, and I'll talk a lot about how I started my journey, right? And where this whole idea of Ikigai came from. So back in 2017, I just moved to high school. I went to boarding school in Kenya, away from home. My first time, I was like 15, 16 years old. And after my first year, I didn't have the best of first years, so I got suspended. Um, I I I had this really toxic friend group. There's this girl that I liked that didn't like me back. I was feeling rejected. And it was honestly such a like bad first year, I would say, but I didn't realize that was a thing for me. And I just like continued. And then on the last day of school, I got dengue fever. I didn't get any medication. I traveled back with it to Tanzania. And because of how poor our healthcare system is, it took them 7 days to figure out that it was dengue fever. On the morning of Eid, I remember being taken to the hospital. I was admitted because my platelet count dropped really low. I was there for another week, and then I fully recovered, and I was ready to be discharged. But from the point of getting discharged up to the next 3 weeks, I went into this phase where I had no control over myself. So it was 3 weeks, and I don't remember anything, but from the stories that people told me, I went into this phase where I was hypersexual and hyperactive, and I carried out actions that someone that was drunk, high, and crazy at the same time. So I did a bunch of crazy things. And I wake up 3 weeks later on my bed. I check the date on my phone, and the date says it's been 3 weeks. And I'm like, what? The last thing I remember was being discharged from the hospital, right? So I'm so confused. I don't understand what's happening. I call my parents, and my parents rush home and they explain to me everything. And I was in shock. I was like, some of the things that they described, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, where did 3 weeks of my life just go? I don't remember anything. And so we did go to a lot of like, we went to a psychologist. She said I had bipolar disorder. We went to the doctors that treated me for dengue fever. They say that the dengue fever got to my brain. We went to some people thought I was possessed. And there's a bunch of like different theories of what happened to me. But I realized, instead of thinking too much about what really happened, how about I take this what happened to me as some sort of wake up call and some sort of turning point, because I that first year was really bad, and I felt like my life was going away from me, and for some reason up to today I feel like going through that experience was some sort of wake up call for me to get my shit together, and figure out what I want to do in this world. So I sat down, and I don't know if it's destiny or I don't know what it is, but right after I recovered, I had an opportunity to start a personal project in my school, and I could do anything of my choice. Everyone in my grade did it. But I was like, how about I take this project as an opportunity to get my shit together, and then let's just see where it goes. So that's how I started For The Menstruator. But to talk a little bit more about the analogy, and the reason why I talk about the whole story is because going through that experience sort of allowed me to really sit down and think about what I want my legacy to be, what I want to be remembered for. And every time I ask myself this question, the one thing that comes to my mind is I want to be remembered for making an impact on someone else's life. And when I got that opportunity to start the personal project, I was like, this is the perfect way to do it, right? So I'm saying this because the reason I mentioned Ikigai, because Ikigai is all about your purpose, and it's all about thinking about um, your life and what you want to be remembered for, right? It's a mix of your passion, your purpose, the things you're good at, and what you can make money out of. And Ikigai is right at the center. So I personally used that experience of pain and trauma and turned it to figure out what my Ikigai is. But what I believe is that Ikigai is when you do find your Ikigai, when you do find your purpose, it only builds the foundation for that bridge of your life. So now that you have found your purpose, you have some sort of foundation. Now now you start building your bridge, and the one way to do that is, I feel like a lot of young people, every time they get an idea, before even consulting or doing research about what's already there, they just want to go reinvent the wheel, right? They just want to start something of their own. They want to have that title of being founder and CEO, whatever it is. But instead, what I did was I went online and I researched about what are some of the existing initiatives, what are some of the existing things that are already in place, and then how can I add value to it. So I found out that there was a group of women with disabilities. There was a workshop that they had in Kenya that did make their own reusable pads. Although I created my own, I knew that the thing that I made wasn't the best. It would only last for 6 months. So what I did was, instead of competing with that group, I went to them and I was like, you know what, let's partner up. How about we get together? Let's create something together. And together we put both our designs, and we were able to create a package that lasted for 3 years, not 6 months. So that was one bridge I sort of connected with. And then I was like, you know what? How about what else can I do to actually reach out to the menstruators that need help? So I was like, okay, we have a product now. We have a community that's there. The one thing that's stopping me to get there is that I don't have, let's say, the people to help me. So I simply use social media, put out so much content and ask people to help out. And with that, a lot of volunteers reached out, and I had a whole team, and now we're 160 people helping out, you know. So it was as simple as me sitting in my room, putting out stuff, building bridges. And through that, we've gone on to help 8,500 people around the world. And as it wasn't obviously as simple as building a bridge, but the concept still stays the same, you know. How do you use the existing organizations, the existing initiatives, the existing resources that are out there, and how do you contribute to it? And instead of starting and reinventing your own wheel, it's as simple as building bridges, connecting dots. And what I do believe in, that the end goal is that when you do build all of these bridges, so you do find your purpose, build a foundation, start something of your own to fulfill that bridge, then you to take it a step forward. How do you then empower other people to do the same, you know? And once you do all of that, I feel like the universe finds its way to reward you with things that are materialistic. So things like awards, recognition, fame, money, you name it. A lot of young people, I feel like a lot of the times, go running after this thing. So I've seen a tendency to get a certain scholarship. But instead, I feel like if you work towards your purpose and work towards fulfilling it, the universe somehow finds its way of rewarding you. And I think that that idea is just so crazy. So instead of running after this materialistic short-term things, how about instead you go running after figuring out what your purpose towards fulfilling your purpose, and then the universe will reward you with all these things. And that's sort of the whole analogy of the bridge. I know I went on for so long, but
No, it's fine.
yeah, that's what I've come up with from my last few years. Yeah.
I know that you mentioned in that moment in your TED Talk, and sort of had this for a later section, but I'll just bring it up right now. This idea of asking yourself existential questions. Like, people generally go through that period in their life, right? For some people, it was this year. For others, it was earlier. For some, they might not even have had that moment yet. Who knows? And you mentioned something really interesting right now, where you said that this idea that a lot of us have to chase after sort of these titles of recognition, or these awards and some glamour and fame. Do you think that it's something inherent within every young generation that's ever came? This idea that, like, I've been sort of looking into this from my own end, but there must be some sort of fine balance between the idea of like humility and trying to come up towards a problem with some sort of humility, acknowledging what has been done in the past may not work now, but acknowledging that people in the past did make strides to a better world in every part of life. Where do you find that balance? I know you've sort of touched upon this, which is like you've humbled yourself and you've sort of looked at your worldview as saying, look, I'm here like specifically to focus on my goal to empower others, to empower other individuals to take care of their own lives at the end of the day, because you're not just handing something over to them. In fact, you're going above and beyond your way to empower them, saying, look, I don't want you to rely on me. I want you don't have to take handouts from me. Empower yourself. Then you go help others, and you do the whole trickle effect. Where do you think that humility is sometimes required in some of our sort of change maker generations? Because we have this whole movement going around, and believe me, there's plenty of good people coming out of it. There's people who are radically changing certain parts of the world that have to be changed, or certain parts of the way we do things that have to be changed. There are others, however, that don't seem to be wise to be changed, or the way they're approaching it sort of dishonest. Where do you kind of see that happy medium? What would you advise to some people who have that mindset, like, let's reinvent the wheel, like you said? Sometimes there's no point of doing it, but sometimes it comes from sort of like a dishonest, proud sense of pride that, like, I'm the only one who's ever thought of this. Like, no one else prior to me in the thousands of years that we've existed has ever thought of some variation.
Yeah, I get that so much. I mean, I see a lot of people deliberately even creating problems just to solve it,
Right.
And especially with now, like, I feel like with the rise of social media and everyone, wanting to have that title of founder and CEO of this project, or to get that certain recognition. I feel like, yeah, a lot of, especially I feel like in North America and Europe, there's this culture of wanting to start something, and so I definitely agree with you in terms of you do have to have the humility to, one, first acknowledge all the people before you that have worked towards this. You're never, that's the thing, you're never starting something of your own. There's something that's already been done. So just acknowledging that, and then seeing how you can add value to what already there is existing, instead of, again, just starting something of your own. Just like, I feel like a lot of the times young people think that they work in a vacuum, and they think that, you know what, this is the problem and it's just me and that problem, and I'm gonna solve this. A lot of the times I feel like young people have that, but instead you really have to do your research and connect with the existing people that they've already done something, and then see how you can add value to what's already being done. But also then the idea of um, empowering instead of helping. So a lot of the times, especially in like social impact related projects, people identify a problem, and so I'll talk about the menstrual space. The issue is that menstruators don't have access to products. Now there'll be two types of people, and usually a lot of people are the first tab. People will go to the supermarket, buy a bunch of menstrual products, distribute them, post it on their social media. I've helped 10,000 people. And then after 3 months, those pads run out, and then they'll go back to the supermarket and go back to give it to them. I've helped 10,000 other people, and it's the same cycle again and again. And what keeps their work going is the fact that the communities that they're serving have to rely on them. And in reality, you're not solving any problem. But instead you're creating a problem of your own, and you're creating the dependency syndrome. So when I started my journey, I created a reusable pad that would only last for 6 months. And I went to the community. I distributed. I supported 22 menstruators. And I was like, you know what I've done? I wrote a whole report about it. I got a good grade. And I felt really good and proud. But after interacting with some of the menstruators after 6 months, I realized the product just ran out, and they couldn't use it. And I was like, what really did I do? I felt so good about doing this, but it only lasted 6 months. And now these people are calling me back again for support. So what have I really done, and a lot of people do that. And it's so common, especially in the social impact nonprofit space.
That we also the communities that we work with, we spend so much time with them, to, one, educate them on what options they have available, educate them on reproductive and menstrual health, But then we also teach them how to use, wash, and stitch their own reusables. And since we use locally available materials, we know that after the 3 years, the menstruators don't have to call us. Instead, they can go to their local community, local market, and buy a bunch of materials. We usually try and give them stitching machines. So they can go to local markets, buy their own materials, and then they can make their own reusables. And the good thing about that is, one, there's an exponential effect. So if there's a group of 1,000, we go in there and just support 10 menstruators. Those 10 will help 10 others, and those 10 will help 10 others. And eventually then the whole community will get access. But apart from that, then we also try and see how can they sort of earn a living out of making some of these reusables. How can they sell it in their local communities and then come out of that poverty cycle that they were in previously? Mm-hmm. So we're sort of tackling the root cause of the problem, which is them not being able to afford some of these. And that's the difference between those two types of people. So instead of simply going to the supermarket and buying this bunch of pads and giving it to them, only lasting for a few months, we take out the time to actually support these menstruators for lifelong almost. And I think just having that mindset of empowering instead of helping, and it's the whole idea of, don't give them fish, but teach them how to fish. It's just so important, I think. Yeah.
And speaking on that topic, for those people who want to build bridges of their own, could you speak on how you manage your time, and if you faced any backlash, how did you persevere through it?
Okay. So I personally wouldn't claim to have figured out managing my time. It's been something I'm personally even struggling with right now that I just moved to Canada. But there are some tips and tricks I do try and follow. And one is just figuring out your priorities, honestly. Like, everyone has 24 hours in a day. Everyone has X many hours of school that they have to do, and just figuring out what your priorities and what's most important to you is, I think, so important. And then just taking out enough time for the things that matter the most, So taking out, before I actually used to struggle with this, is I used to take out more time on the organization and my projects than school, and my parents would get so mad at me. There was once a time where my parents came for the parent-teacher meeting, and they actually told my teachers that, can you make sure Ziyaan doesn't work on his projects, because we were scared that his grades are gonna drop, So I had to sort of sneak around and carry out projects. But honestly, I think it's so important to have your education first. I think that should be your number one priority. And then even if it's as little as 1 hour a day to work on things that you value the most, things that you're passionate about, it's usually that 1 hour every day that adds up to a lot of hours and actually doing something, versus taking out 5 hours in one day and then the rest of the week you're not doing anything. It doesn't make sense. So I sort of have my priorities set out. I know what I want to do. I know what I value the most, and just sitting down and holding yourself 100% accountable. When you're not doing the right thing, then hold yourself accountable for it. But also, I think something that's really helped over the years is surrounding myself with the right people. I think a lot of the times, especially when I initially started off, I surrounded myself with the wrong group. People that always wanted to go out, party, have fun, not study, not work on anything. And when you're surrounded with such a group, I personally struggle to say no, and I get peer pressured easily. And you're never motivated to do that. But if you're surrounding yourself with people that do know their priorities, you're surrounding yourself with people that do know what they want to achieve, then you're motivated, and these people will also hold you accountable, right? So I think that's just so important. When you wanna sort of do something and get your stuff together. So I wouldn't say I figured out time management, something I struggle with up to today, but these are some of the things I always try and do when I see things aren't going the right way. Yeah.
Yeah. Your sort of central, I guess, central tenet of who you are as a person is your organization For The Menstruator. You sort of you've had awards, but you also had lots of recognition, lots of PR recognition for this organization For The Menstruator. I know you've sort of went into it with regards to the process, how you address the situation. You kind of went through your entire blueprint. One of the questions that we were sort of thinking about is, with regards to menstruation as a topic per se, was it something that was like, you obviously just mentioned that you just saw this as a weird inequity in society and like, why is this happening? And they go solve it. If that was the only motivator, like if there was any other event that happened, that's the first question. Second question is, was there any pressure, like backlash for you to stop in that sense? Because is it a taboo topic to address, at least in sort of dynamics that you were engaging them in?
Yeah.
Inspired me was I watched a documentary on Al Jazeera, and it was about India's menstruation. Man, that was one of the first times I learned about like menstruation and periods, and I was like, whoa, like I didn't know like menstruators don't have access to product. I didn't even know that's an issue, right? And then I talked to my mom about it. Man, my mom grew up in India, and she came from a vulnerable background, I would say. So when she was small, there was a point in time in her life where she didn't have access. And I was like, whoa, so it's an issue around the world. My mom's gone through it when she's small. Let me look more into it. And I do my research, and I found out that 65% of the menstruators in Kenya at that time and in Tanzania didn't have access. And I was like, okay, this is an issue in my community. I continued my research, and that's how I thought it was an issue. And I had to do a lot of like informational interviews, actually go to communities and figure out what's really causing this problem. And that's sort of why I went through this journey and why I decided to work on it. And then your second question was about like taboos and backlash. I think especially in East Africa, this is something you don't talk about. Unfortunately, menstruation is seen as a taboo. A lot of menstruators are stigmatized, and being a non-menstruator, like you just can't talk about periods. And even saying the word period is like, whoa, like why are you talking about that, right? So definitely received a lot of backlash. A lot of people in my community were like, why is Ziyaan doing this? I've people have passed comments like Ziyaan's just trying to do this so he can get closer to like girls and menstruators. People have said the most random and stupid things, but at the end of the day, that like being a non-menstruator, I've sort of just taken it as an advantage for me to sort of break the stigma. If a non-menstruator can talk about it, why can't a menstruator talk about it? So and I've used being a non-menstruator as sort of an advantage to also get other non-menstruators to talk about it and have such conversations. So now this is how I look at it. But yes, when I did start off, and probably even up to today, it's hard to have conversations about this. I've a lot of communities that we've gone to starting off. When I just get there, I've had to step out of the room and let my other menstruating team members take the lead, because menstruators are just not comfortable talking about it, So there's been a lot of situations like that, but now I try and use my platform. I try and use that advantage to spark and inspire conversation. And every time there is backlash, it only sort of pushes me to do more. And I know that there's still an issue, and the work needs to keep going.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. In terms of like changing culture, as you mentioned, that you have to sort of you took the lead in terms of changing something it's been a taboo, I would say, for like a long time, everywhere around the world, some regions more than others. There's this idea that like young people are generally the sort of purveyors of culture, and sometimes you just kind of poke at the bear sometimes and kind of get it to move a meter. Sometimes you don't want to like outright wake up the bear and let it chase you. So it's, to me, it's something like really unique and like something like astonishing to us, considering the fact that we just assumed that it was either more of a socio-development issue or socioeconomic issue versus more of a sort of a cultural sort of norm or something established within that region of the world because it's so taboo culturally speaking. But when you looked at it, are you seeing any other angles from which it's coming from? Because it could be access, but as I've sort of seen your work, as sort of you said, that there are donors, there are sort of institutions present. It's not like this is something totally primal. It's more like there's a disconnect between the people who actually need the service, the individuals who are the entire business model is built around, i.e., the menstruators or the women, and everyone else in between. And this disconnect is somehow fueled by culture necessarily, not necessarily just socioeconomic conditions. So am I analyzing this correctly?
Yeah, I think you definitely are. I feel like it's a mix of socioeconomic factors and cultural factors. Unfortunately, for generations in the past, like this has been something that you haven't talked about in a lot of religions as well. Like I know in some religions you can't pray if you're on your period when you're menstruating. In some traditions you can't cook when you're menstruating. You can't be in the same room as someone that's menstruating. You can't fast when you're menstruating. So there's a lot of religions and a lot of cultures have sort of seen menstruation as dirty, or menstruation as something that's not talked about. And I've interacted with a lot of menstruators that we've worked with that have said that because it's seen as such a stigma, and as a taboo, a lot of the times there have been times where menstruators have been able, like their families can afford um products, but since the breadwinner of the family is a non-menstruator, it's so hard for them to even approach that conversation that, okay, you know what, I need money. I'm on my period and I need money to buy products. And that has been a barrier to them getting access to these products. There've been situations, where especially during COVID, we saw a lot of testimonials where some of these menstruators, since only one person in the family would be allowed to go out and buy products, um, and usually it would be a non-menstruator, just having that conversation with that non-menstruator that, yo, I need a pad or I need a tampon, is so hard. So culturally I feel like it's like you analyze it right in terms of there is a cultural factor at stake. And it's the thing is, this issue is so deeply engraved, and it's been something that has been going on for years, that it's more than just giving product. There's a lot of education that has to take place, a lot of desensitization that has to take place. When you look at laws and policies, unfortunately most of the laws and policies in a lot of countries around the world were made by non-menstruators. So they never kept in mind the fact that menstruators need products and it should be free for all. In a lot of the countries, there's a pink tax where menstrual products have an value-added tax, just because it's not considered an essential item. So you can see that, and these laws and policies were made years and years ago, when menstruators didn't even have a seat on the table to talk about this, and it was something that was not talked about completely. So you can see that culturally, it's a huge factor at stake, when approaching this issue, and you sort of have to take a 360 approach, rather than again just being in a vacuum and looking at it through one lens.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, what are your next steps? Like, what are the next bridges you want to build in relation to For The Menstruator?
Yeah. So right now, what we're looking at is, as I mentioned earlier, I just moved to Canada, and so we recently just got registered as a nonprofit here, which is really exciting.
Congratulations.
And and right now our focus is we have quite a few sort of things we're looking at. So one, our work continues in some of the most rural regions where period poverty is a very big issue, especially in developing countries. But we're also trying to look at how can we best add value to the existing movements in Canada, in North America, and in Europe. We want to potentially look at how we can work in policy making, and how we can be advocates, to, let's say, take out the pink tax where the pink tax is there, or make menstrual products free for all. We're also looking at potentially coming up with a sort of a more sustainable social enterprise model, that could be for profit, and profits then go towards the cause. Because right now, most of our funding has been sort of donor through donors and through like fundraisers and things like that. So we're sort of developing our own, continuing to develop our business model, and figuring out a way to best sustain ourselves. But yeah, that's sort of the work in terms of what we have planned for this year. So this year our goal is to help 12,000 menstruators. Last year we were able to support 8,500 menstruators. And before that, before COVID hit, we had only supported 500. So yeah, last year was a very big year for us, and only because we realized that the people that we supported needed us the most, especially during COVID. So we're like, we need to go all out, and we need to be on the front line supporting people that need us the most. So yeah, hopefully we're able to reach our goals this year, and yeah, continue the work that we're doing.
Yeah, unless you have any more questions about For The Menstruator.
Yeah, from Climate
Cardinals.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you, completely switch gears to Climate Cardinals. So what or who are the Climate Cardinals, and what type of climate information do you relay to others? What is the purpose of the Cardinals, and what do you hope to achieve with your time there?
Yeah, so I got involved with Climate Cardinals last year during COVID. I met up with the founder, Sophia, and she's been working in the climate space for a while, and I also had a personal interest in the climate crisis. I know how big of an issue it is. Even with the work that we do, it's For The Menstruator, we try and we have like reusable, environmental friendly products. So when I was in high school, I actually carried out a lot of initiatives, beach cleanups to one of my major initiatives was I tried to figure out how my high school could be zero waste. So we introduced like a vegetarian Friday. We put in policies and a system in which all of our waste would be recycled or composted. And we did a lot of stuff. I like personally had a deep interest in the climate space. And then after having the conversation with the founder, she had this in mind. She worked in the climate space, and she said that she used to work with Fridays for Future, and she noticed that a lot of the climate information that's out there is only in English. And one barrier for people to not take climate action is the fact that they don't even know about it, you know. So she was inspired by she went back to Iran, and she talked to her family members, and they didn't know anything about the climate because there's no information in Persian available for them. So she was inspired to start up this movement. I was like, there's a good opportunity for me to get involved. And the goal that we have right now is to make climate information more accessible in almost every language around the world. So since mid last year, we have translated climate information over 100 languages. We have over 8,000 volunteers, and our work has reached over 300,000 people. And it's been a really exciting and sort of different venture for me. I work as the outreach director, so I primarily work on I oversee partnerships. So we have partnered up with the United Nations Environmental Program, organizations like Translators Without Borders, and a lot of other major organizations. And then I also oversee finance and fundraising. So that's sort of my involvement with Climate Cardinals, and it's really exciting. And I personally have learned so much through my work with them. Yeah.
I know you just said that you just sort of dipped your feet with regards to this organization, but you've obviously, like most of our generation, Gen Z, basically around the world, there's sort of been a stress in our education systems to kind of educate the next generation about this sort of climate crisis. So in general, everyone's sort of heard about it. Yeah. But your whole idea is to relate to the other generation. But my question with regards to the climate crisis is something that we've been talking about, which is at least in the West, there's this idea of convenience. I think this idea that like now it's more like with Greta Thunberg, and you mentioned her in your TED Talk about how she built a bridge between humans, and essentially just the awareness of climate. Like even though it's already happening, you had a younger figure come to the forefront. a lot of the debates now either happening just in the West, but more so recently in newly industrialized countries. So I'm looking at emerging markets like India,
Yeah.
China not being an emerging market anymore, more like a developed market, at least from like more standards. But besides China, India, Brazil, and the African continent, are sort of having this other debate about, well, in life, there's sort of trade-offs. We have these weird we have this dichotomy in life where it's like, yeah, nothing can be perfect. No solution's obviously perfect. There's more of trade-offs. Now, there's been this weird talk and these weird dialogues and these debates within, at least now arising, which is, where do we go from here from a climate crisis as Gen Z? Because both of our backgrounds, at least Akil's sustainable energy, renewable energy engineering, and mine's from like sciences. There seems to be this weird disconnect between the science establishment of the STEM fields, and whether that be not just in academia, because the ones in academia sort of just write the papers and the studies, but you're talking about the innovators like the Elon Musks of the world, or like so-called solar energy like companies, and then you have the sort of activists. Now, the perception from this side, at least from the so-called innovators of the academics, is that the academics are purely as literally just to deliver hypotheses and to like not really speed up the science and technology pipeline that's for so long has sustained the global development of the world for the past 80 years since the end of World War II. And now there's this weird disconnect between the technology side and the science side to this weird activist side. And this disconnect is somehow, I don't think it's being talked about that much. Whether it be people who actually need, like in your case, where the work you're doing to convey the knowledge of the activism to the developing world, and which has way more people in the West compared to the West. Do you see that this problem arising in the future, whereby we are creating a disconnect between the activists and the technologists and the people who are actually in the technology space and actually in the fields of innovating in the science would be able to sort of keep the activists in check and activists keep them in check? Because sort of debates like, okay, one side saying, well, you guys are just rambling on and on and on, where's your solutions? And the other side saying, well, I mean, like, you should speed up the science technology pipeline. And, we're having these weird, like, yelling back and forth from each other. And I think the solution right now, at least from our Gen Z perspective, I believe is not being met, because the climate crisis has been a really old phenomenon. It's more than just becoming streamlined, right? At least from the 90s with like preservation of animal habitats, to evolving to the ozone issue, now evolving to climate change and global warming. So there sort of have been variations. Now it's more of, as you mentioned, social media, interconnectivity with the world. Where do you see the next decade going, considering the fact that we're post-2020, we're living in an ever more globalized world? So generally speaking, this issue is bound to come out somehow, because the facts of life will hit people in the face. And the question is, can we turn on the wipers soon, or are we just going to get hit in the face? So what do you think about that?
I want to be optimistic, but looking around the world, I feel like the climate crisis, especially you mentioned the innovators and the activists, but something you mentioned is government. You didn't mention governments, right? And I feel like governments, especially in Africa or in newly industrialized countries, that is not their top of priorities. It's probably the least of their priorities at this point, But the sad reality is that, unfortunately, these countries that aren't even focusing on it will be hit the most, because they don't have the resources to then cope up with the harsh realities of it. So looking at the next decade, I think there's definitely going to be progress in terms of how serious this issue is taken. But I feel like
awareness, and yes, a lot of let's say people know about it now, but there's no actionable steps being taken. And as you mentioned, the innovators and the scientists don't even get enough credit for what they do. So let's say
credit per se, but then innovators aren't, and there is that disconnect. So I definitely feel like there's a lot of work to be done, and in the next 10 years, yes, there will be a few steps taken, but I don't think it'll be enough. And I feel like we'll probably
get a halt, and then we'll just have to deal with it. Because the way things are going, and COVID was also like just an example of how if we do want to take this seriously and we do treat it as a crisis, then we can. We can go to a stop, and we never thought in our lifetime that we'd see something like this, but we did, right? So I personally feel like something like that will happen. But on more on the optimistic side, I feel like yes, there is a disconnect between activists, governments, and let's say innovators, and people in the STEM fields, but there's also a disconnect between the different parts of the world, we did talk about how people are aware of this issue, and it is, let's say, being put in the education system, and with social media people are more aware of it. But in terms of accessibility, in terms of what actual steps people can take, in terms of the systems in place, living in East Africa and spending a lot of time in India, there's no systems in place, as things as simple as the fact that we can, let's say, sort our waste here. We can't do that at home. There's just one garbage bin and you put everything there, and no one sorts it ever, So things as simple as that is the least of priorities, especially in the developing world. And I feel like that disconnect is something that has to also be considered. But yeah, I don't know if I wouldn't say I have the answer of what's gonna happen in the next 10 years.
No, for sure. Yeah.
It's definitely an interesting conversation to have, and something that we need to talk about, And I am trying to be optimistic. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is the individual role we have in this whole movement. As much as we talk about it, do I personally live an environmental conscious lifestyle? No. And as much as I want to, I don't, and most of the people that do talk about it and are activists, I don't see them living an environmental lifestyle. So that's the sad reality, and the reason I look up to Greta so much is although she gets a lot of hate and a lot of, I don't know, people talk so much shit about her, I feel like she does lead by example. She does live a very environmental, sustainable lifestyle. And I feel like more activists or more people that want to contribute to this space need to do, and me personally included. It's more than just posting that one thread on your story.
Right.
It's more than just tagging your friends in comments and be like, yo, like, shit, this is something that's happening. It's more than just reading the news and talking about it. And that's just the sad reality of it, that we can talk about it all day, but if individually we aren't doing anything, and we keep blaming governments, and we keep blaming, I don't know, organizations and companies like Coca-Cola to do something, and we keep throwing the blame and the ball in everyone else's court, but not do anything ourselves, I think that's what it should come down to, and that's what really needs to happen. Because these conversations can go on forever and ever, and then will just be too late,
Very true.
Yeah, like we definitely got to start at the roots. But even so, looking at other countries in Western nations, a lot of them sign things like the Paris Climate Accord and all that, and no one really follows through with it. So how can we expect other developing countries to follow through with that too, right?
Yeah. There's more even a dialogue about the trade-offs in human capital, which is, as you said, a lot of these countries don't have the priority to address the climate crisis because they're too focused on alleviating poverty. I'm sorry.
Exactly, yeah.
And even though we're in the West, we can clearly see the idea as to why even here in the West, you've seen not just politicians and government, but actual innovators. For example, Elon Musk in recent podcast interview said that I'm not a fossil fuel destroyer. I'm not out there to my PR isn't to I hate fossil fuels. My whole PR is, look, I think this technology has much more superior capability to power way more of the world, and it's a bit more safer, and it's renewable. So here's my pitch.
Exactly.
I think maybe if we consider moving away with the climate crisis from being more of a he said she said game to more there's going to be trade-offs. We're not going to fix everything. Some people, at least some of the so-called privileged people here in the West who claim to be activists say they're not going to. But if we accept that maybe things are, there's always trade-offs in life.
For sure.
And the thing that you mentioned, which is, hey, as more of Africa gets lit up in electricity, the more that one child, hopeful child that looks up can actually, you know what, worry about, hey, where am I going to put my waste? Or that family can worry about, hey, if I have my next meal, I'll worry about where I'm going to put my next piece of waste. I'm not going to worry about that if I can't put food on the table. So, I mean, it's a difficult conversation, as you said.
Yes.
Yeah. So, moving on to the last segment before we, the second last segment, which is during the COVID-19 crisis, you've sort of been active in Africa and in your community with regards to delivering, using your existing framework to kind of step up and ramp up. As you said, For The Menstruator had its amazing year in 2020, despite everything else going to shit. How do you think that, do you like, when you look back on it, it was truly the idea that you were capable of being a stakeholder in this, like a change maker, right? A lot of people kind of looked at this crisis, a once in a generation crisis, as you just said. None of us thought ever we're going to see something like this. What was your drive to just jump in and help? Was it the ability that you had the existing infrastructure, and was it this idea that I could be a part of something that will be written down in history? Like, what was your motivator?
I think, and this was one of the first things that we talked about. For me, I definitely say I'm in a position of privilege. I've had opportunities that a lot of people around me haven't. And I always think about why was I born in the family that I was in? Why do I have all these privileges? I could have been born in a family that's struggling with some of these issues, right? And I ask myself these tough questions, and it goes back to my purpose, and it goes back to my why, you know. Every day before sleeping, I ask myself this question. I remind myself that, look, Ziyaan, you have all these opportunities. I had an opportunity to come to Canada on a full scholarship. In high school, I was supported a lot by I was on financial aid, and I got a lot of support to go to the academy. And I asked myself, okay, I have had all these opportunities. How do I now use that privilege to give back? And how do I use that? And I could just sit at home and look at the world unfold and read about these issues, but I don't want that. I just can't. I just feel like I have a responsibility to do something, and the reason why I have this privilege is for a reason. And the more I give, I've noticed that, and that's not my motivator, but I've noticed that the universe works in such a way that the more you put out, the more you'll receive back. And every time I receive back, I put it back out in the universe, you know. And that's just what that's what's kept me going. So during COVID itself, apart from For The Menstruator, we use the existing workshops that we have to make reusable masks, and we're able to distribute over 2,000 masks to disabled folks in Kenya. Since I graduated from high school during COVID, and as I mentioned, I had an opportunity to study there on financial aid. I got my whole class together and started a fundraiser to support other deserving students to get that same education, and we raised up to $60,000. And there were small little acts. I had joined an organization for a while where I was literally going on the front lines distributing masks and PPE. And it's those little things that matter the most. And it's not because I want to be remembered as the Mahatma Gandhi or the Nelson Mandela of this world. I don't want to go down in history books or whatever. For me, it's about that one person that I was able to support. And that inner satisfaction that you get, I think there's no other feeling in this world that can be compared to it. And as superficial and as weird as it sounds, it is crazy. That just feeling that you're in a position to help someone. And if I don't do that, I just feel guilty. I just feel like I'm not doing enough, right? So every opportunity I do get, even through conversations like this, to support someone, for anyone that's listening, right? I take that opportunity, and I think it's just thinking about the privileges that we have, and figuring out how, even if it's the smallest of ways, even if it's just giving a smile or like opening the door for someone on the way, you know, just something as small as that, I think, is just so important. And just looking at the world through that lens is yeah, I think something that keeps me going every day. Being reminded of my purpose. And as I look back, I know not everyone has to go through an experience of pain or trauma to figure out what their purpose is. But I had that opportunity to go through that phase where I almost lost my life, and people around me thought I would never come back to my normal state of mind, right? I lost 3 weeks of my life just like that. Just going through that experience, I remind myself of that, and I was like, what if I never came back? What if my platelet count dropped so low that I'd pass away from dengue fever? What if, right? So just reminding myself of that, I think, has been something that's kept me going. And every opportunity that I do get, and if I do have the capacity, I try and help out. And yeah, I think that's just so important. Yeah.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think our listeners will learn a lot from your experience, because I know we have as well, listening to you and your TED Talk. So we wanted to go to a recurring segment on our show called the 3 takeaways. So these 3 takeaways can be anything said on the podcast, or like 3 principles of life you had. And with that being said, what are your 3 takeaways?
So I think my main takeaways is, whatever age you are, whatever experiences you've gone through, I think everyone, after listening to this conversation, needs to sit down and think about why they were put into this world. Think about again what they want to be remembered for. Think about why they were put in the positions that they are in right now. Think about their privileges. Think about what value they can add in someone else's life, and think about, again, what they want to be remembered for, and how they can contribute to humanity. And that doesn't have to necessarily be starting up a whole organization. That doesn't necessarily have to be like being an activist or being a change maker. It could be as simple as little small things in life that you can do on a personal level. And always just think about what your purpose is and why you're put into this world. I think that's just so important. And another thing I would say as a takeaway is, wherever you are in your own journey, just remember that each one of us is on their own journey in this life. So don't compare yourself to me. Don't compare yourself to other people. Your time will come when you have to do it. But at the same time, remember that you are in 100% control of what you are doing in your life. And once you do figure out that purpose, just start something. Go for it. Don't overthink. Don't be like, I have to start this whole like global movement and help thousands of people around the world. It doesn't have to be that, just start little small steps. And trust me, that will lead on to becoming something that's valuable. And even if it's just helping one person, that's powerful. So just having that mindset of just going for it and not overthinking everything. A lot of the times we have these ideas and we have all these things. I personally have so many ideas I'm working on right now, but I'm like, how am I going to do it? How am I going to take out time? Where do I even start? But I realized as I look back that the reason why I said For The Menstruator is I just went for it. I never planned for it to become like this whole global thing. I never planned to get all these like recognition and to help thousands of people around the world. That was never in the works. My goal was literally when I started off, was I did it for like the school project. And then when I continued, I literally just want to help people. And even it was helping one person, that's what mattered, right? So I think just having that mindset, that go-getting mindset, and not overthinking every situation. And whatever you're going through, personally, I've gone through so much failure. I've gone through so many setbacks, but something that has kept me going has been my purpose. So instead of, I usually go by this quote that says, the energy is in the purpose, not the plan. I feel like a lot of the times young people focus too much on the plan. They're like, you know what, in the next year, I'm going to go to university. And then after that, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to get this job. And after that job, I'm going to get a promotion. And then after that promotion, I'm going to retire. And maybe if I'm alive, then I'll help someone. But instead, like, don't focus too much on the plan. Like, just focus on your purpose, and the plan will just come on its own. And just having that mindset has kept me going. And that's what I guess I'll leave with. Yeah.
Perfect. And before we go, where can people find you, our audience, if they want to speak to you, kind of reach out for advice or for any opportunities or for any sort of guidance and next steps? They want to maybe further clarify any of these 3 takeaways. Where can they reach you?
So people can reach out to me either on LinkedIn or on Instagram. I try and be as responsive as I can. So LinkedIn, my name ZIYAA and VIRJI, and Instagram is my first name dot last name. So yeah, DM me. I'm always down to have conversations. But yeah, don't text me and be like, hi. I'm not gonna reply. Like, there's so many people, and I've noticed it's so bad. Like, people will just be like, hi, and I'm like, bro, like, I'm not trying to have a conversation with you right now. Just be like, hi, hope you're well. This is who I am, and this is what I want. Is there any way you can help me? And I'll reply. So that's good tip for networking. Never reach out to someone that you want to have a conversation and be like, hi. Yeah, but yeah, that's where people can reach out, and then you can also follow our social media platforms for the Menstruator. Is just For The Menstruator on all platforms. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the description as well as your TED Talk. But that was a really great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Ziyaan. Once again, thank you for your time. I know we kind of went a bit over time, but it was an amazing conversation. It was pretty enlightening, and we hope that someone in the audience at least took away something, and hopefully one day we'll be working at your organization or something.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. Honestly, this was such an honor, and I've personally took away so much from it. Some of these things I don't even talk about, but when I actually say them, I'm like, whoa, I should also follow some of those things that I say. So definitely thank you guys for having me.
So much.
I wish you all the luck.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Check us out for an audio-only experience on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other outlets. Follow us on all of our social media, and please consider supporting us on Patreon. All of these links will be in the description. That's it for us today. Welcome to the new world.